My name is Daniel, and until a year ago, I believed I had everything a man could ask for. A growing career, a beautiful fiancée, and a family that people around me called perfect. I lived in a bright apartment overlooking the city skyline, where every morning started with hope and every night ended with dreams. I was proud of what I had built. I was proud of who I had become. Every morning, I would wake up early, pour myself a cup of black coffee, and stand by the window watching the city come alive. The sound of traffic, the smell of fresh air mixed with noise, it was all a part of the rhythm of my life. And in that rhythm, there was always one name that made everything meaningful: Sophie, my fiancée. Sophie was the kind of woman who could change the atmosphere of a room without saying a word. Her smile carried warmth, her voice had calmness, and her presence made me feel like the world was safe. We had been together for 3 years, and when I finally proposed to her, I thought my life had reached its peak. My father, Richard, had been proud to... He had congratulated me with a rare smile, the kind that came only once in a while. My father was a respected businessman, a man who built his name from nothing. Strong, confident, and always in control. That's how everyone saw him. But to me, he was distant. We didn't share much beyond family dinners and short talks about work. Still, I respected him. He was the kind of man I always tried to make proud, even when he never said it. My work at the company was going well. I had been promoted recently, and Sophie had been the first person I told. She hugged me so tightly that night, whispering, "I'm proud of you, Daniel." I can still hear her voice, soft and full of love. I believed her completely. I trusted her more than anyone in my life. Our wedding date was set for 6 months later. We spent weekends looking at wedding halls, tasting cakes, and planning our future home. She would talk about curtains. I would talk about furniture. She wanted a white piano in the living room, even though she couldn't play. "It just looks beautiful," she said, laughing. I laughed with her. I thought that's what love was, finding beauty even in silly dreams. Sometimes, my father would join us for dinner. He would compliment her choice of wine, ask about her work, and share stories from his younger days. Sophie always listened with interest, leaning forward, her eyes sparkling. I felt proud seeing them talk. It was rare to see my father open up to anyone. I thought Sophie had brought light into both of our lives. I thought she was the bridge that connected us as a family. But I was wrong. One night, we were sitting at my apartment balcony. The city lights were glowing, and Sophie leaned her head on my shoulder. "You're quiet tonight," she said softly. "Just tired," I replied. She smiled and whispered, "You're always so serious, Daniel. Promise me something." I turned to her. "What?" She looked at me with those calm brown eyes and said, "Promise me that no matter what happens in life, you'll always trust me." I laughed. "Of course I trust you. Why would I not?" She smiled again, but for a second, something in her expression changed. It was small, almost invisible. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I noticed it, but ignored it. We went back to talking about our honeymoon plans. That was the first time I missed a sign. The first time I looked away from the truth that was already standing right in front of me. A few weeks later, I began to feel small shifts, things that didn't make sense. Sophie started coming home later than usual, saying she had extra meetings. Sometimes she didn't answer my calls right away. Once she accidentally called me by a wrong name, Rick, my father's nickname. She laughed it off, saying she'd been talking to him earlier about the wedding. I didn't think much of it then. Still, a strange feeling began to grow inside me, a quiet doubt. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that every couple goes through stressful days. But deep inside, I knew something had changed. My father, too, began acting differently. He called me more often, asking about Sophie, about the wedding plans, about things he'd never cared for before. He even sent her flowers once from the family, he said. I told myself not to overthink it. They were just getting along well, and maybe, finally, he was trying to be a good father. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to keep my perfect life intact, no matter what small cracks appeared. But deep down, the world I had built was already beginning to shake. I didn't know it yet, but that was the calm before the storm, the last few moments of peace before everything I trusted, everything I loved, would fall apart. The first real sign came one Thursday evening. I had left the office earlier than usual because I wanted to surprise Sophie with dinner. She had mentioned she was tired and might work late, so I thought it would be nice to take her favorite meal to her workplace. The idea made me smile the whole drive there. I imagined her face lighting up when she saw me standing at her office door with a bag of her favorite pasta. When I reached her building, the receptionist greeted me with a warm smile. But her expression changed when I asked if Sophie was still in. "She left about an hour ago," she said. I blinked, confused. "Are you sure?" The receptionist nodded. "Yes," she said she was meeting someone for dinner. My first thought was that maybe she went to see one of her friends. Sophie was social, always talking about her circle of colleagues and old college friends. Still, something in me felt unsettled. I texted her, "Hey, still at work? Want to grab dinner?" She didn't reply. A few minutes passed, then an hour. I ended up driving around the city before heading home alone, the pasta growing cold on the seat beside me. She came home later that night, smiling as if nothing had happened. "You're still awake?" she asked, hanging her purse. I tried to sound calm. "Yeah, just finishing some work." "How was your evening?" She paused slightly. "Just dinner with a friend." I looked at her closely. Her tone was natural, but her eyes avoided mine. "Just tired," I replied. I wanted to believe her, but something inside me whispered that her story didn't fit. That night, I lay awake for hours. Every small detail replayed in my mind: her late replies, her changed perfume, the way she avoided long talks lately. It wasn't just stress. It wasn't just work. Something was wrong. The next few days, I started noticing patterns. She kept her phone closer than before, always face down on the table. Her smile became shorter. Her attention drifted away, even when she was with me. Once, when her phone rang, she grabbed it quickly before I could even glance at the screen. "It's just work," she said too quickly. I didn't want to turn into the suspicious kind of person who checks their partner's phone. That wasn't me. I believed in trust. But that word trust was starting to feel like a rope around my neck. One afternoon, while Sophie was in the shower, her phone lit up with a message. I didn't mean to look, but the screen faced me, and the name caught my eye. It said R. Just that, a single letter. My heart skipped a beat. There was only one person she called R, my father, Richard. The message preview read, "Can't stop thinking about last night. We need to be careful." For a moment, my world froze. My breath caught in my throat, and I stared at the screen as if it might change its words. My hands trembled. The sound of water from the bathroom suddenly felt distant, like it belonged to another world. I didn't know what to think. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The truth was knocking on the door of my heart, demanding to be let in, and I wasn't ready to face it. When she came out, I pretended nothing had happened. I smiled, asked if she wanted coffee, tried to act normal. Inside, though, my chest was burning. Every word she said after that sounded fake. Every smile looked rehearsed. That weekend, I decided to test something. My father had invited me to his house for dinner, as he often did. I told Sophie about it, pretending I'd be working late instead. "Go ahead without me," I said. She hesitated, then nodded. "All right, I'll just stay home tonight." But later that evening, I parked my car near my father's house and waited. The night was cold and silent, the kind of silence that makes every sound echo. Around 8, I saw a car pull up. Sophie stepped out, dressed neatly, her hair tied back, her perfume filling the air even from a distance. My father opened the door for her. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I just sat there, frozen, watching the two people I loved most in the world stand together in the same doorway, smiling at each other in a way that didn't look like family. I clenched the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. My heart raced so fast I could hear it pounding in my ears. Every memory of trust, every word of love they'd ever said to me, came crashing down. I wanted to rush in. I wanted to scream to ask why. But something stopped me. Maybe it was disbelief, maybe fear. I drove away instead, my mind numb. The road lights blurred through my tears. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at nothing. Questions kept spinning in my head. Why her? Why him? Was it always a lie? By morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. My eyes were empty, my smile gone. The perfect life I once had was over. But as the sun rose, something inside me changed. The pain slowly turned into something else, a quiet, burning anger. It wasn't loud or wild. It was cold, controlled, the kind of anger that plans. That was the day I decided if they wanted to play games, I would play better. If they thought they could destroy my trust, I would destroy their illusion. And that was the beginning of my revenge. I did not want to look. I told myself I would not become that man who searched for proof. But the anger that had settled in me was patient. It waited for a moment of weakness, and one slow evening, I found it. Sophie had left her laptop open on the living room table. She'd gone to the kitchen to make tea, and the screen glowed like an invitation. My hand moved before my brain agreed. There, in a folder named Plans, were files with dates and short notes. My first thought was work documents, but the words inside had nothing to do with business. They were small messages, photos, and recordings. One photo stood out: Sophie and my father, close on a balcony, faces near, laughing in a way that looked too private for family. I clicked on a short voice note. It was their laughter first, soft and familiar, then a whisper. Sophie's voice, hushed. Tonight was perfect. You make me feel alive. My father's laugh followed, low and intimate. He called her a pet name I'd never heard before. Something inside me shattered. I sat down on the couch, the room tilting, the tea kettle hissed, forgotten. The files were like a map dates times, short messages about meetings at odd restaurants, late-night calls, quiet hotel rooms when I was out of town. I felt sick, like I had swallowed something that would not pass. I did not confront them that night. I could not. Instead, I copied everything to a flash drive. I wanted proof, not emotion. Proof was a cold thing, and I needed it to be cold. I needed it to feel solid, undeniable. I left the laptop as it was and walked out into the night. For days, I moved like a ghost in my own life. I went to work, I smiled to clients, I answered emails, but my head was full of images that replayed like broken film. I would open the files, study each photo, listen to the voice notes until the words blurred. In one message, Sophie had written to someone, "I never thought I could have both of you." In another, my father had written, "We must be careful. Daniel suspects nothing." The sentence was simple, but it felt like an accusation carved into my chest. The worst part was the memory of trust. How many times had I looked into their faces and believed? The meals we shared, the plans we made, the future I pictured with Sophie, were they all a stage? I walked into my father's office one evening, wanting an answer that did not exist. He was at his desk, surrounded by awards and framed photos, every sign of a life built on respect. He looked up and smiled with the same small distance he always wore. I forced myself to sit. "Everything okay?" he asked. I wanted to ask him to his face, to throw the files on the table and make him explain. But how do you accuse the man who raised you, who taught you to be strong? How do you break the image of a father into pieces? Instead, I asked about trivial things: an upcoming meeting, a new client-any thing to keep my voice steady. When I left, I felt worse. I had put a mask on for him, and it stuck. The mask stuck on my face, and I could hardly breathe. I began to watch them more closely. Sophie's movements, my father's calls, the way they avoided certain topics. In public, they were careful. It was in private, in small slips and looks, that they betrayed themselves. Once, at a family dinner, Sophie reached for my hand in a way that felt normal, then glanced at my father and squeezed his knee under the table. No one noticed, or maybe they noticed and pretended not to. The house felt full of people who had learned to lie without changing their faces. I could have confronted Sophie. A single conversation could have torn everything open. But I did not want to hear excuses. I did not want to be told it was a mistake or to see her cry and be forgiven. The betrayal was not just about a moment of weakness. It felt like a theft of my past, of the small things that had built our life. I wanted answers, yes, but I wanted justice more. So I chose to build a case. I hired a private investigator, someone who could collect evidence without emotion. I told him only what I had to, that I suspected an affair and needed confirmation. He moved like a professional, silent cameras, tracking notes, careful timing. I felt nervy paying for someone to follow my fiancé and father, but the money was nothing compared to the sense of being blind. Within 2 weeks, the investigator returned with photos and recordings. There were meetings in hotels, whispered conversations outside restaurants, and a video from a small room where they looked at each other like conspirators. He handed me a folder, and my hands shook as I flipped through it. The photographs were clear, the messages were undeniable. In one photo, My father pressed his forehead to Sophie's with a tenderness reserved for lovers. In another, Sophie rested her hand on his chest in a way that belonged to a different story than the one I had been told. The proof did not make me feel better. It made me colder. The warm anger that had once threatened to consume me was now sharpened into something controlled. I had the truth. Now what? The breakdown did not happen all at once. It was a slow erosion. I woke to a life that no longer fit. When I passed Sophie in the hallway, I could not touch her. When she spoke, I heard a stranger. Sleeping became impossible because sleep was when the mind stitched the day into memory, and I did not want those stitches to hold. I told a close friend, Mark, about my suspicion. In a night when the grief bit deep, he sat quietly, hands wrapped around a mug, listening. I did not show him the files at first. I wanted someone to tell me I was mad, that I was imagining things. But when I finally let him see the photos, his face changed. "Daniel," he said softly, "you need to leave. You need to get away while you plan." Leave? Where would I go? I had no one to replace what I lost. My home was a house of cards. My job had been a place of pride. Even my father's company was stained now. The only thing left was this burning idea of justice. Sophie noticed a change. She asked if I was okay more times than I could count. I told her I was tired, that work was hectic, that I needed space. She offered to help, to talk, to plan. Her voice was sweet, sincere-sounding, and till I caught her watching me with eyes I could not read, it was as if she wondered whether I would explode. The first time I confronted my father, it was months after I found the files. I went to his study with the investigator's folder under my arm. He was alone, reading, the house quiet. My heart pounded, but my hand did not shake. I placed the folder on his desk and opened it to the photos, one by one. He looked at each image with calm, as if he had expected this moment his entire life. When he reached the message that said, "We must be careful," "Daniel suspects nothing," his face hardened. "You should have told me," I said. "You should have told me the truth." He folded his hands and stared at me. "What truth, Daniel?" "That your father is a man who fell when he should not have." "That love?" I laughed then, a hollow sound. "You call this love." He leaned forward. "You do not understand the world I live in. There are things you cannot see from your place. This was never about you. Not really." Sophie brought light to my nights. She listened. She made me feel young again. "You betrayed me," I said. "You betrayed your son." His voice was quiet, but steady. "I did what I had to for happiness. You were always the serious one. You would have been fine." "Fine? Fine for what?" "To live a lie." Our argument ended with cold silence. He refused to feel shame. He refused to step down from the image he had built. His arrogance became the final insult. In that moment, I understood that justice would not come from his remorse. It would have to come from me. I moved out the next week. I took only what I needed: my clothes, my documents, the wedding album I could not bear to throw away. I left a note for Sophie. "We are done." I did not specify why. Why give her the satisfaction of an explanation? Why let her see me break? The weeks that followed were thick with grief. Friends offered support, but their words bounced off the walls I had built around me. At work, colleagues asked if I was okay. I lied. I smiled. Inside, the plan for revenge grew like a seed pushed into dark soil. It fed on every memory of humiliation. I began to watch their routines. I learned where my father kept the backup hard drives in his office. I noted Sophie's favorite places, the names she used privately. I found out small things: the bank she used, the accounts where my father held money separate from the business. It was like reconstructing a secret life from pieces. I was not a violent man, but I was clever with plans. I knew how to destroy without raising my hand. My anger was surgical. I would not show myself as brutal. I would show them how fragile their life was when the truth was sharpened and pointed. Revenge is not always loud. Sometimes it is a long, careful work of setting dominoes so that when the last one falls, the whole picture collapses. I wanted more than to hurt them. I wanted clear justice, exposure, loss of respect, a life where their words were weighed and found empty. First, I needed to cut the money that hid their choices. My father's business was strong, but it relied on image. I began to learn the company's weak points. I met with a former employee who had been let go after disagreeing with some of my father's deals. He was grateful for a listening ear. In exchange for my help finding evidence of mismanagement, He told me where certain transactions were routed. Once I had that, I wired money trails to papers and journalists who cared about corruption. Not direct accusations, just questions, small leaks. The press loves a mystery. Second, I needed Sophie's social mask removed. She had curated an image of sweet fiancé and designer of homes. I found messages to influencers, to contacts who facilitated introductions, even letters promising anonymity for favorable posts. I compiled these into a dossier and quietly sent it to contacts who could use the story. I did not send everything at once. My goal was a collapse that felt inevitable. Third, I made sure the company board would feel pressure. I found one board member who was always jealous of my father's control, someone who wanted a chance to rise. I gave him documents that hinted at financial irregularities, not enough to convict, but enough to make him suspicious. Soon, whispers began at board meetings. Lawyers started asking questions in morose tones. The first cracks in my father's fortress started to appear. But the most delicate part of the plan was personal. I needed to make Sophie see what she had lost without it looking like petty revenge. I could have publicly exposed every message, every touch. I could have destroyed her with shame. Instead, I wanted her to face a future where no one trusted her again. I began to introduce questions into the lives around her small. Polite inquiries about her work ethic, quiet doubt voiced to mutual friends. Rumors are gentle predators. They eat slowly, but leave bones. At home, I kept a steady face. I messaged her once in a while, neutral and controlled, never revealing that I knew everything. She wrote back with concern and sometimes coldness. I let her be. In my private world, the gears moved. I was patient. The first public sign came subtly. A respected business blog posted a short piece questioning a recent deal my father had led. It was written by someone known to push for transparency. The piece was cautious, more puzzle than accusation, but it was enough. People noticed. My father called a meeting, his face carved from stone. At the same time, Sophie lost a collaboration with an influencer who quietly rescinded support after my dossier reached her manager. A magazine that had promised to feature Sophie's new design line pulled out at the last minute. The cancellations were explained as scheduling issues, but the dominoes were falling. I felt nothing for a while, no joy, no relief. The plan was moving, and that was satisfaction enough. I slept in pieces, rising early to check news feeds, to arrange the next subtle push. I did not want to be seen as the hand that guided these events. I wanted them to feel like consequence, not a plot. The trap had to be subtle. Confrontation would make them defensive, and defensive people hide better. I needed a setting where truth could walk into light without being led. I chose my father's charity gala. It was the kind of event where names mattered and reputation was the currency. My father loved these night sprays, applause, the soft glow of accomplishment. He would not suspect that the same stage could crumble beneath his feet. I bought a ticket and sat in the back, a neutral face in a sea of well-wishers. Sophie arrived in a dress that shimmered, perfect makeup, a smile that belonged to someone used to being adored. They mingled, they posed for cameras, they shook hands like actors in an old play. Midway through the night, a journalist I had worked with stood up during the Q&A. She had spoken quietly with me earlier, and now she held the microphone with the confidence of someone who knew she had a story. "Mr. Richard Hargrove," she began, using my father's full name. "There have been recent questions about transactions linked to your firm. Would you like to address them now?" The room grew quiet. My father's face tightened. He answered carefully, as he always did, with practiced assurance. "I stand by my record," he said. "All our work is above board." He smiled, a politician's smile. That was when the journalist did something unexpected. She revealed a short clip, one we had legally acquired from a meeting room, where a voice that sounded like my father arranged a transfer, with a line about keeping this off the books. It was not an accusation, but it was damning to those who listened closely. A murmur moved through the crowd. Sophie's hand found mine under the table for a moment. I did not pull away. I let her feel the weight of what happened. Cameras flashed. People whispered. The gala turned to a storm of hushed conversations and raised brows. My father tried to recover, to laugh it off, but the seed was planted. The next week brought more. Regulators opened questions. Clients asked for clarity. The board demanded meetings. My father's empire, so steady in the world's eyes, wavered. He called me, his voice thin. "Daniel, come see me," he begged. Please, I went, but I did not go as a son seeking reconciliation. I went as someone who had already decided. We met in his office under the same framed photos where once we had shared smiles. He looked old there, not from age, but from the weight of regret he had yet to admit. "I wanted to protect the family," he said. "I thought I could handle it." "You could have told me," I said. "You could have told me about her." He flinched. "You don't understand what it means to be lonely at the top." "I understand enough," I said. "I understand what you took away from me." His eyes softened for a beat, and in that beat, I almost believed he might fall apart. But then he hardened again. "And what have you done?" he asked. "I made sure you would face what you built," I said. "I did what I had to." He laughed then, a bitter sound. "You think you can take me down? This company has survived worse." "We'll see," I replied. The confrontation was a quiet thing. It did not happen with shouting or broken glass. It happened at my father's home on a Sunday morning when the neighborhood was still. I arrived unannounced and found him in the garden tending to roses as if the small acts of care could erase what he had done. Sophie stood by the back door, her face pale. She did not speak as I approached. My father looked up, surprised, then angry. "What is this?" he asked. "This is the last time you speak to me as if nothing happened," I said. My voice was steady. "This is the last time I let you act like the world is still okay." Sophie watched us, and in her eyes I saw fear, for the first time fear, that I might make everything worse. She had always been afraid of losing control. Now she seemed to fear losing even the messy pieces she had built with my father. "You ruined everything," she said finally, voice low. "Why would you do this? We could have had everything." "You had everything already," I answered. "You took it from me. You think you owned what you gave me," she snapped. Anger flashed in her face, fierce and ugly. "You pried people apart and then acted like a victim." My father stepped forward then, as if to defend himself. "She is young," he said. "We were lonely. There was a bond between us that doesn't erase what we have done for you." "You betrayed me," I said, turning to him. "You betrayed the person who trusted you most." "You asked for loyalty," he said. "What have you shown us? You fled like a child." I did not answer. I could see the lines of their defense's words that tried to rearrange what happened into something softer. But the evidence was there. The board had questions, the press had interest, clients had doubts. Their life of secrets was collapsing into a land of facts. Sophie's eyes met mine for a long moment. There was something like regret there, quick and thin. "Daniel," she said. "I know," I cut her off. "You will not make me the one who forgives you with a few words." "It was wrong," she whispered, voice small. "So was denying me the truth," I said. "So was every quiet meeting and every hidden message." She started to cry then, the kind of sound that leaves no composure. My father's face crumpled in a way I had never seen. For the first time, he looked like a man who had miscalculated. "You wanted me to explain," he said. "Here I am, explaining." "I am sorry." "Your sorry comes too late," I replied. The confrontation ended without violence, but with a clear separation. They would have to face the consequences. I handed over the remaining files to my lawyer and the investigator. I had done what I needed to do. My revenge was no longer about jealousy. It was about exposing a pattern of lies that had to be corrected. Justice came slowly. It came in boardrooms and legal letters, in clients who asked for audits, and in journalists who dug deeper. My father's company lost a major account that had been a pillar of his reputation. The board forced him to take a leave while an internal investigation ran its course. He stepped down from committees he once led. Where his name once opened doors, it now opened questions. Sophie's life collapsed differently. Social invitations stopped coming. Her design partners distanced themselves. Friends chose sides or simply stepped back. There was no criminal charge in the beginning. Fair is not a crime, but the stain of betrayal reached far. People mistrusted her judgment. Her brand suffered, and with it, the money she had hoped would fund a future. I did not celebrate. Watching them lose everything felt hollow. Their suffering could not stitch back what I had lost. Yet there was a quiet satisfaction in watching truth round the corner and catch up with them. Pride had been the currency they traded in, and it was draining out like water from a burst pipe. There were moments of close calls. My father threatened legal action, claiming defamation. Sophie posted a public message that read like an apology, but it was the sort of forgiveness that asked for sympathy. I let the public record speak and answered only with silence. Silence is loud when you have nothing left to hide. Months passed,